Luffy vs Katakuri was the last major One Piece fight we've had, and I'm pretty sure it is the longest fight in One Piece so far as the amount of chapters or episodes. The fight took place over the span of 17 chapters and 21 episodes, and it is definitely a fan favourite. People argue every day about Luffy vs Katakuri and Luffy vs Lucci, which fight was better. Luffy vs Lucci being the better fight is a very easy choice for me personally, but I can see why Luffy vs Katakuri is revered as a fantastic fight. When it comes to actually understanding the fight, there are already a lot of videos tackling that topic by the likes of Grand Line Review and Nux and those videos are pretty great. They do a perfect job at explaining their interpretations about that fight. I'm going to try and tackle understanding the growth of Luffy in that fight in particular. I wanted to make an understanding Luffy vs Katakuri video talking about the fight itself, but considering some great videos have already been done by that, I don't want to just sit here and repeat what other people have already said. If that is what you're looking for though, I'll leave a link in the description to the videos by Grand Line Review and Nux, and I highly suggest you check those two videos out if you're here to just understand how or why Luffy won when Katakuri was clearly the physically superior individual in basically every single way. What I am going to try and achieve with this video is to try and make people understand that Luffy's growth during this fight was astronomical. At the start of the fight, Katakuri was superior to Luffy in every single way, obviously barring endurance. And at the end of the fight, Katakuri was still superior to Luffy in every single way, obviously barring endurance. That makes it sound like Luffy didn't grow in the fight, but my point is more so that the difference in Katakuri's superiority from the beginning of the fight and at the end of the fight is something that cannot be disregarded. He was very superior at the start, and at the end he was still superior, but it wasn't as much as it was in the beginning. I feel like everybody would agree that Katakuri could have beaten Luffy at the start of the fight with very little difficulty. Katakuri had the means to destroy Luffy. He was far stronger than Luffy, but the reason he never defeated him is because Luffy kept getting back up, and this was clearly something new to Katakuri. It was seemingly the first time an opponent of his kept dodging him and getting back up, because he himself said, "My attacks have never been dodged so much. This is stressful." It was getting to his head, and although he was perfectly fine physically, Katakuri began to feel some sort of mental fatigue. And this is at the start of the fight. However, I believe that if Luffy and Katakuri had a rematch, a fair rematch with no outside involvement, straight after their original fight, but they were both at 100%, it would be an extremely difficult win for Katakuri, an extreme diff fight. So at the start of the fight, Luffy would get mid-diffed, but by the end of the fight he had grown so much that he is pushing Katakuri to an extreme diff. Katakuri would still obviously win because at the end of the fight he was still superior. He had better armament haki, far better observation haki, he was faster, he had the superior devil fruit, he hit harder, and was just overall superior. But there's one thing that Luffy, I guess, learned or got a grasp of during the fight that completely changed the tide of the battle. Once Luffy unlocked a variant of Future Sight and had the ability to actually land attacks on Katakuri, it became very clear that Katakuri could no longer play around. He stopped mocking Luffy with the Mochi attacks that looked exactly the same as Luffy's Gomu attacks and started using a different fighting style, pulling out attacks like Diced Mochi, the Explosive Punch, or Unstoppable Donotsu, all being attacks of a very different fighting style to the one that Katakuri used mockingly at the start of the fight. Although Luffy would still inevitably lose to Katakuri, he would land a bundle of attacks that would prove troublesome for Kat. And I'm not saying this in a mental battle kind of situation or a battle of ideals like Luffy and Katakuri's fight was, but rather a battle of pure physicality and overall strengths. And the reason I think this, the main reason I think it would be an extreme diff, is because of Luffy's endurance. His endurance, to me at least, is something extremely overlooked or underrated in the One Piece community. Luffy can take a hit. He can take a lot of hits, very powerful hits, and he can keep going until he achieves his goal. Luffy is not giving up until he physically cannot go on any longer, but even then, he can physically go for quite some time. I mean, look at it like this. He had the shit beat out of him for hours on end until he finally got that little grasp of Future Sight and finally could land attacks on Katakuri. The Luffy that could finally hit Kat was very fatigued and nowhere near at 100%. So what if he was at 100%? What if Luffy started the fight with that grasp of future sight? He would obviously still take a shit ton of damage, a lot more damage than Katakuri would because he's still slower and weaker than Kat, so he's obviously gonna land less frequent and less powerful hits. But Kat, in my opinion, cannot take a punch like Luffy can. Kat said it himself, he's not used to getting hit. He probably got soft over time because of his amazing future sight. He just doesn't get hit, he isn't used to it. And that would mean his endurance is very inferior to Luffy's. Katakuri literally took 10 hits in the entire battle. In 17 chapters he only took 10 hits, whilst Luffy took over 40. I'm talking about the manga, by the way, for that. I had to clarify that because in the anime there are so many more hits that are just non-canon and included, but I guess it's filling the gaps because Oda did pace the fight kind of weirdly in the manga. So in the anime there's a lot of instances where Toei add in some extra hits, but I'm not going to account for them and I'd rather stick to the source material so that we can understand what Oda was going for when he wrote this fight. Now when it comes to Katakuri's endurance, I'm obviously not going to disregard when he stabbed himself with the trident, but I feel like people love to blow that moment out of proportion. To the people who use this instance to say Katakuri was nerfed for the rest of the fight, you realise the only reason Katakuri even stabbed himself was because he landed an unfair hit on Luffy. Luffy would have definitely dodged the attack had it not been for Flampe's involvement. Now at the end of the day, these two individuals are pirates and there are no rules to a fight between pirates, but my point is that from a power scaling perspective, the stab that Katakuri inflicted upon himself literally equals out, or actually negates the attack that he landed on Luffy. Luffy never would have taken that damage in the first place, so Kat negated it by inflicting the same amount of damage on himself. Currently, as of chapter 975 of One Piece when I'm recording this video, there isn't a single doubt in my mind that Luffy is stronger than Katakuri. He has honed his observation haki and future sight, or advanced observation haki, and I feel like it's fair to say at this point he has mastered it. And even more recently he got a grasp of an advanced armament haki and then trained it for an entire week, and in shonen main character terminology, a week of training is the equivalent of 5 years of training for anybody else. And I'm genuinely not joking here. People need to come to terms with the fact that Luffy is unordinary. He is special. He is unlike 99% of the One Piece verse. There are only a handful of individuals in the entire world of One Piece that can grow, that can adapt, and that can become as strong as Luffy has become in the small amount of time he has had. I feel like people slept on his 2-year training with Rayleigh because they expected so much more from that amount of time. But if he didn't have that 2 years of training, he would have lost to Hody Jones and the Straw Hats would have all been killed by the New Fishman Pirates. Rayleigh explicitly said he's going to teach Luffy the basics of haki, and the only true way for your haki to transcend and for you to become a stronger fighter overall is to take part in an extremely difficult battle. Then your haki will bloom, which is why Luffy vs Katakuri was the perfect training for him. Luffy grew tremendously in that battle, and if you look back at that fight, you'll notice that Luffy's motivations actually changed midway. Initially he just wanted to defeat Katakuri, but that ended up changing to him wanting to surpass Katakuri and wanting to train his observation. Luffy was getting pummeled in situations where he could have just ran or dodged normally because he wanted to unlock the ability to see into the future. He recalled Rayleigh's words that the best way for you to grow is to fight in an extremely difficult battle, and he took advantage of this fight. Another thing I want to address is that little grasp of future sight. That surface level of advanced observation is something the fanbase heavily slept on, in my opinion. That boosted Luffy's overall power tremendously. And if he had that power at the start of the fight when he was fresh, then it could have changed the outcome of the fight completely. Sure, Luffy still won in the fight against Katakuri, but the audience and the readers obviously don't see Luffy and Kat as comparable individuals. In fact, there's a lot of fans that hate how the fight went down because Luffy just shouldn't have been able to win, and they say things like plot armor and arsepool, and sure, I do share some of these complaints, but the Katakuri wank has been kind of excessive. Luffy was outclassed by Kat, sure, he was getting pummeled, but the difference between them isn't as big as people make it seem. I've seen people treat the gap in power between Kat and Luffy like it was the gap between Luffy and Kaido in 924, and I'm sorry, that's just absurd. Literally the main reason why Luffy was getting pummeled by Cat was because he couldn't even hit him. That was his biggest issue, his inferior observation haki. But once he unlocked that little grasp of future sight, that issue was far less of a problem for him. Sure, it wasn't completely dispelled and Cat was still the superior observation user by quite a large margin, but Luffy managed to land a few hits in, and when you look at the difference in their endurance, it's pretty fair to say that Luffy would have landed enough hits to really damage Katakuri. So there are my thoughts on Luffy's growth against Katakuri. I think at the start of the fight, Luffy would get defeated at a mid or even perhaps a low difficulty, but by the end of the fight he had grown so much that he would be able to push Katakuri to an extremely difficult fight. Sure, he still loses in both scenarios, but that's a given. Katakuri is an absolute monster. But this is by the end of the fight exactly 80 chapters ago. Now, currently, Luffy is winning and nobody can tell me otherwise. The training in Udon is an obvious buff from Oda that's going to give him the ability to wound Kaido, probably one of the most durable people in the entire One Piece verse, and then you add on his mastery of future sight and it is clear that Luffy is superior. But let me know, how much do you guys think Luffy grew in the fight versus Katakuri? Do you think Luffy is still weaker than Katakuri? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe for more One Piece content, and as always, please leave your suggestions for future videos you would like to see me make. I've been Fiji, peace.